it's needed. But welcome to everybody. My name is Munira Elizabeth Reed from Ohio and in the United States. We're grateful that you've chosen to spend this time and take it out of your day for this gathering and this conversation. This conversation is a part of a larger series that's about mentoring issues for the Dances of Universal Peace. And so we're welcoming a larger community. There are people who are mentors here who've been dancing for a very long time. And there are people who are relatively new dancers gathering here. The hope is if you're a new dancer, you'll pick up some things about dances, the history of the dances, the essence or the jewel of the dances. You'll also hear some things about the mentoring process. And this will help you in terms of asking questions of your mentor and knowing what perhaps to expect in terms of the kind of mentoring you're receiving or not. Young or old in the dances, young or old in your chronological age, everyone, welcome, welcome, welcome. Let's, I'll be the only one speaking, but let's do the invocation. Hazrat Inayat Khan. Taking a breath. Breathing in toward the one, breathing out, united with all. Toward the one source, and breathing out, united with all, united across this community, holding hands in virtual reality, virtual space. In gratitude that we're able to gather in this way. Toward the one, the perfection of love, harmony, and beauty. The only being. United with all the illuminated souls who form the embodiment of the message, the spirit of guidance. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Amen. The chat is opened right now, and during this time of entry and during this time of introduction to our speakers, if you want to say your name, where you're from, please write that in. After introductions, the chat will be closed to the whole room, and then the chat is open only to the hosts and co-hosts, where you're invited to ask questions that you would like to ask to have addressed in the final phase of our time together. The overview of this time together is this. We will spend time with our guests, first exploring the history and the jewel of the dances. And then we will have a practice, chant and practice together, followed by the second part where we explore key elements and what has been working, what hasn't worked in one's experience and their experience as mentors. The third part has to do with the future of the dances and cultural appropriation issues, which are rising as there is great global growth in our practice. Another spiritual practice and chant will precede then the final section where we'll do a Q&A. And for that Q&A time, question and answer time, we're asking you to put your questions that are arising for you throughout our time together, put those in the chat that will go to the hosts and co-hosts. That's what it's going to look like today. And My job, though, is to try to moderate this discussion. And we are so fortunate to have with us today two incredible beings who have made deep contribution in shaping the dances of universal peace. And if you're old timers to the dances, you will know these persons. If you're new to the dances, you might not, depending on where you live and what dance camps and mentoring processes you have done. We assume that Saadi Neil Douglas-Klotz goes without any introduction, but perhaps to some newer, younger dancers might. He's responsible, along with Tasneem Fernandez, for creating the organization and the incorporation of the global international movement of the Dances of Universal Peace. He's known for a lot of different things, but I'm not doing that kind of introduction. I'm going to say we're talking about the essence and the being. And I think that will shine through as you meet both of these persons. Sylvia Murillo comes from us from South America, has been dancing over 25 years, has been part of the history of the impetus and spread throughout South America. I was asking her something about her life, and she said, yeah, this is healing medicine. The dances are healing medicine that I encountered in my life is about sharing that medicine. And being a mother of two young men is part of her being. The two of them in this first part are going to talk about their connection to the dances, their history. So all the kind of accolades and histories and lists of things and accomplishments are not important, but you'll get a sense of that as they share and talk about their personal history, along with the history of the Dances of Universal Peace. We're grateful for your presence and your ability to ground us in this story. So I'm going to first I'm going to turn to Saadi and ask you if you would start out talking with us some about history and personal history with the dances, along with, if it interweaves, the jewel of the dances.
Yeah, I'd be happy to do that, Munira. It's great to be here with you and FIBA, and welcome to all of you here. I see a number of folks in the participant list who were around in the day, as we say, when mentoring actually began and when the Dance Network began. What I want to do is actually just talk a little bit about my personal relationship to the whole process of training and mentoring, and from there get into the jewel and how Tasneem Fernandez, who I see also is here today, welcome Tasneem, designed the original training programs or mentoring programs. And the main thing I wanted to share with people, and I don't want to go into a huge history, although there is a very long history, is that it was not easy and it was not straightforward. And that there was not universal, how would we say, support for what we were doing. Samuel Lewis began the Dances of Universal Peace in a very, very small group, a group that was originally dedicated to the walks. And then he began to work with spiritual movement. He describes this in a recording and also in his letters. And this, you could say, this incubation with a very small group of his murids in working with spiritual movement, then later blossomed into this big form that we now call Dances of Universal Peace. So you can read about this timeline on the Dances website if you're interested in more of that. Samuel Lewis only had this small class as an advanced dance class in San Francisco. It was held in his garage in San Francisco. And after his passing, two forms of this class were continued. One was in the same place, in the garage in San Francisco, the basement of Samuel Lewis's house, by Wali Ali, Murshid Wali Ali. And the other was wherever Moinuddin and Fatima were living. Wali Ali was teaching together with his then wife, Khadija Jessica Hall, who was a fabulous master of the walks, actually, who most of you will never have heard of and never have met. So I came to this class as a young person in 1976, and I won't describe all the things that happened with that, but at a certain point, a great number of dances began to come through me. And I'm saying that without any particular anything, because I had no musical background, I had no training in movement, I had no training in dance. I was like a nobody. I had no voice at all, if any of you can believe that. No, I could barely sing. And these dances began to come through both before and after I managed and sort of co-led a trip to Turkey, Pakistan, and India, helping to introduce Moinuddin's then successor, his wife Fatima, who was also a master of the walks, to all of Samuel Lewis's teachers who were still alive at that point. And that trip was in 1978 and 1979. When I returned, these dances continued to come through. And then there was a crisis. And the crisis for the small advanced dance leading classes was that Moinuddin was very ill with kidney failure and had to take a long break. And after several unsuccessful attempts, ended up in Hawaii. Wali Ali also had to take a break about 1980, as I recall, about the same time Moinuddin left, due to many personal reasons, a divorce amongst them. And Wali Ali left me in charge of this advanced dance class. And up till then, this was the only place where people could get quote unquote training in the dances. And one had to be a murid, one had to be a Sufi student, particularly of the Sufi Islami Ruhaniyat Society or initiator in that, to get into this class. There was no other way. There was no feedback in terms of leading. Feedback was limited in the time that I experienced the class before I was leading it to, if you were halfway through a dance and it wasn't working, Wali Ali would say, "Sit down." I don't know how many of you could tolerate that now, but that was training. So unless you brought the proper atmosphere to the thing, it actually didn't matter how the dance went, but if you didn't bring the inner part, the outer didn't matter. So I continued the class as best as possible, again with Wali Ali's now former wife, Khadija, who was a master of the walks. And who's going to come to me? I was a nobody. So we gradually, there were people who did want to come, but they lived further away than you could come for a weekly class. So we began to have this class, say 1 weekend a month, and then we moved this class to a retreat center in Pescadero, California, and it continued as these early weekends in Pescadero, California. And this was in approximately 1983, 84. In 1982, I met Tasneem Fernandez. I should say at the end of 1981, I had, again, on the same retreat where the initial dances of the Aramaic prayer came through, I had, you could say, I don't know what you want to call it, I'll just say it without any charge attached to it, a vision, a message from Murshid Sam, who said that the dances need to go beyond the small Sufi circle in which they were being held. They needed to go out to more people. And I consulted with a number of people, including former murids of Murshid Samuel Lewis, and they weren't interested in this. One of the people told me, why would I want to train other people to lead dances? It'll take bread off my table. So already in those early days, the dances were being seen as a possible way to make a living, which is not really the way one should be seeing them. Tasneem was the only person who responded. We met, we had an immediate rapport. She had had a similar vision. She was from then what was called the Sufi order. I was from the Ruhaniyat. And so we began to work together. And as I say, then following that, we had the first Lama dance camps in 1984, where we were doing training. And I'll mention the elements of that training later. but the elements were based on what we perceive to be the actual gem of the dances, the jewel of the dances, which is really about the question, what are the dances? What are the dances? Samuel Lewis called them joy without drugs. He called them peace through the arts. He called them a number of different things. But as we went further into it, and as I looked into the practices that Samuel Lewis had given, I discovered something very interesting. He says in his long book on spiritual dancing that, and I'll read just a bit of it here, just a short bit from the introduction. He says, when the power of wealth has dominated justice, when the concept of fiction, money, fiction-money, has led to utter destruction, and when the Holy Spirit has been driven ever further away on a path of ascent, to the undoing of what appears before us, he says, without speech, without silence, let us demonstrate. Without speech, without silence, let us demonstrate. And as I discovered much later, this phrase, without speech, without silence, is taken from one of his Zen teachers, Sokean Sasaki. And it really means that whatever you do, it should come from a place of as full realization in inner and outer unity, not just the outer unity of people, but the inner unity of oneself with reality as one can. And I discovered many, many other things in his writings where he gives practices for spiritual music. His whole book of spiritual dancing is based on this, you could say, first touch the source and then let come through what is going to come through. So we were really trying to teach the dances as a spiritual practice first, that one has to come into it with as strong a realization, as deep an atmosphere in a phrase, in a tradition as one can bring. And if one brings that first, then whatever you do is going to be okay. Now, we did teach technique, and I'll mention, the elements of the so-called technique that we taught. Maybe we made things too easy for people because there was no technique taught before we began these dance trainings. So that's where it all began for me. As I said, I had no status with anything. Tasneem had very little status. I should say, with all modesty for my sister Tasneem, but we were minor people in our spiritual groups, and so for us to start this without any money, with very little support, was not easy. The main people we had supporting us from the people who were Samuel Lewis's friends were Murshida Veracorda, Shamshir Biors, Moinadine, who was Sam's successor, supported us. Very few other people supported us. Sarah Morgan also did. But the rest of the people, they had a different attitude. They felt we were, as I mentioned, either taking bread off their table or we were letting things, go too free. And so I'll stop there and turn it over to Fiba. So thanks for your patience.
Thanks, Saadi. I will mention that there's so many resources at the website that can help you with the history and all of these names that Saadi has offered as significant people in the story, particularly for those who are relatively new to the dances. But we'll now ask Fiba if she'll talk some about her own story, personal process, and encounter with the dances.
Thank you. Hello. I actually live in Colombia, in South America. How were the dances? I didn't especially resonate with the dances of universal peace to begin with, because they were religious. And somehow this thing of being religious put me off. So I actually started with circle dances of Finhorn. And there, doing those dances for some years, I've been a teacher all my life. So I had this technique of teaching, which was very helpful. But then a woman here who's married to this fantastic psychiatrist. They were totally enchanted with the dances of universal peace. We Charles Peterson had shared like one dance sometime, and Esperanza went with some friends to Puerto Vallarta, where Darvesha and Malika were leading some dance trainings, and they thought that was wonderful. So they invited Darvesha and Tara to Colombia. And this was in the year 99. And 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 we had this teacher that had passed through Colombia, who was very nice, but he didn't sing too well, I remember. And so he had taught us some dances, and you could hear that he was out of tune, but he was really nice. So that is what we learned. So when Darvesha and Tara were here, they asked us as a group. Well, actually, they did dances in the school where I was working, and I didn't even go to the first session because that day I had classes with my teacher, a teacher of another thing. So I just left them there and told them, this is the place and you can do whatever you want, and I'll see you tomorrow. And the next day I came and they were leading some dances, and I still wasn't very enchanted. But then suddenly something happened when they did the kalama. And when they were doing the kalama, I said, oh, yes, this is what I want. Yes. And so there I said, okay, this is the thing for me. And that next Tuesday we were gathered at Esperanza's house. And so that Besha said, well, why don't you show us what you know? And so I remember I started doing the Ave Maria that had been taught to us, because I was fortunate because I was an English speaker, so I could communicate directly with them. Whereas the other people here in Colombia, well, one of them spoke English and one of them kind of like spoke English and the others didn't speak any English at all. So I was fortunate that I could communicate directly. So of course, when they said, show us something, they all said, you show them something. So I said, okay, I'll show them something. And I remember I started doing the Ave Maria, and suddenly I see that Vesha doing these funny faces. And then that's why I laughed when you said that Sam would stop anyone on the act, because that Vesha suddenly said, no, what are you doing? And I remember that I felt like, oh, what am I doing? Actually, I don't know anything about this, and here I'm sharing a dance with the teachers. So anyways, they corrected us and whatever. And in that first experience, I realized that it was very important to learn a dance the way the dance was. No, that was straight, direct. No, I still think about myself and wonder, why did I continue doing dances? Because that was so no. And well, okay, to make a long story short, I couldn't go to the next weekend because that was the weekend that my father passed away. But the seed had been planted, so I went to the next gathering they had in Puerto Vallarta, and so there were some Colombians, some of us were there, and all these people, most of the people that were there were people from the United States, and they were such beautiful dancers and leaders and singers and everything. And most of us didn't have any musical training or anything, and we were totally newcomers. But it was a beautiful experience, and after that, we started inviting Darvesha, and she would come once a year for some years until the situation in Colombia got a bit very dangerous politically. So then what I did was to follow her wherever I could in the world, close enough to travel and be with her like once a year, once, yeah. And then, well, here the situation is that you had to lead from the beginning, otherwise you couldn't dance because we had no dance leader living nearby. So that made the whole situation of how it was approached in the United States or in Europe or in other places, that made a difference with our reality. And then we started these dance trainings, and I actually feel that I became a certified dance leader and a mentor too soon. I never felt I was ready. Actually, if I am truthful with all of you, I would say that it was only until about 4 or 5 years that I felt, oh, maybe now I'm ready to be a mentor. So, so no, that has been like the history here of working, knowing that maybe you're not as prepared as you should or could be, but it's what we had. And I was what many of the Latins had with everything that I am, many nice things and many things that are not nice. And so, well, that is what we had. And for me, as I said, as Munira said in the introduction, it's been pure medicine. Having to translate everything has been a path of healing for me, and healing with the Christian tradition, and healing with the feminine, and healing with the native traditions, and each time I see that dances are pure medicine. So that's what we do in Latin America.
Thank you, Phoeba, for your story and your vulnerability to just talk about what that process was. And I think that's would resonate with many people along their path of how do I bring what I have to this spiritual practice. Thank you. We're going to shift because we've attended to a lot of words and stories now, and take a breath and a pause, and Saadi's going to lead us in a practice.
Thanks, Phoeba. Thanks, Munira. So this is one of those early dances that came through 1980-ish or so. The movements actually came to someone else, a friend of mine who lives in Nevada, Najat. And she came to me and she said, I got these movements in a dream, and the dream told me you're supposed to channel the music. And since I was bringing through all this other music at the time, I thought, well, okay, I'll put it in the hopper and see what comes, and just opened. And anyway, this was the music that happened. So the words are gate, gate, para samgate, bodhi svaha. I think most of you know that. And if not, I don't know. I can, here, I've got it here. I can put that in the chat. Oops, that's not going to do it, is it? That's better. Oh, well. Anyway, I think most of you know it. So usually we translate this going. This is from the Prajnaparamita Hridaya Sutra. I won't go into a long background on it. Usually we translate it going, always going further beyond that, fully gone to Buddhahood, Bodhi Svaha. Thank you, Munira, for putting that in. Again, Samuel Lewis's Zen teacher, Sokean Sasaki, translates it very differently, which is the focus I now give it. He says instead of going, going, he says you can translate this arriving, arriving, always arriving, arriving ever closer, fully now, here. So it's here, it's now, you know, it's possible. It doesn't have to be put off for the future, whatever it is you're looking for. Gate, gate, paragate, parasamgate, bodhisvaha. 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 Just breathing the words and the feeling. Gate, gate, paragate, parasamgate, bodhisvaha. Gate, gate, paragate, parasamgate, bodhisvaha. Gate, gate, paragate, parasamgate, bodhisvaha. And just breathing in the heart, gate, gate, always arriving into the present moment, going further in, fully more here, arriving closer to our true nature, our original nature. Further, nearer yet, here, now. Opening to the light. Svaha. Thanks, everybody. Back to you, Munira.
Thank you. Thank you, Saadi. We're shifting now into where we're speaking about the mentoring process, key elements of that. Included in that are some questions about, in your experience as mentoring, as mentors, mentoring others, what has worked? What hasn't worked? How do you best nurture and support mentees? I'm going to disappear and hope that, let's start with Sylvia speaking a little bit about that one, and Saadi perhaps speaking a little, but maintaining both people spotlighted, so then it might evolve into a kind of a conversation between you all.
Sure.
So Sylvia, please begin.
Well, thank you, Munira. I would say that Saadi should start, as he is the elder of elders, of course. But okay, I'll give it a try. As I was saying, the process of mentoring, the process of becoming a dance leader and mentoring and all that, as I was saying, I had the advantage of speaking English. So that made it possible for me to be able to communicate with the teachers that we invited. I was their translator for a long time. And that made it possible for me to have like a closer personal contact with the dance leaders. And when the dances came here, of course, we were, well, some of the people that came to the dances had been doing like a long time, like spiritual searching, I would say, myself included. But of course, I think this is a path that never ends. So we could say, or I could say that that we could call ourselves immature in so many ways. But there was something in the spirit, I would say, here in Latin America, or maybe the way we are, or whatever. It's not so easy to generalize, but there is a quality that I feel that is very nourishing and that gives a lot of hope in our countries, and that is the sweetness of their devotion. There is something very beautiful about, even if we don't know how to sing, even if it's difficult to follow instructions, even if we sometimes don't really know the dance or whatever, there is something very much that comes from the heart, which is very profound. And that is what I have found. That is the strength for not only in Latin America, but also in Spain, where I had the fortune to go on many occasions and lead dances. Well, the Spaniards, and please, the Spaniards that are present, excuse me, but the Spaniards are very passionate, and no, the Latins are more, you know, we're not so loud with our words, but then we tend to move a lot with our bodies. No, so the dance says, don't do this because this is from the heart, but then we bend from our waists and go to the floor almost, and well, that's the way we are, no? And so, of course, we want to empty the heart, but for us to empty the heart is to empty ourselves from the bottom of ourselves, not only of our hearts. So the mentoring process here has had to be different. And as I was when we were talking with Munira and Saadi about this, I would tell them there are things that work for some mentees that don't work for others. And that is such a personal process. Each mentee needs something different. And now with this pandemic and all this thing that we've been meeting through Zoom, something very beautiful has happened. And actually it has been that we get together, and in this gossip time that I have a group of mentees that I work with. And in this gossip time that we have before the actual class begins, no, we're still not in class. I am in class, but they're not in class. My students don't know that, but I am already in class. So I hear what's going on in their lives and how they are, and this happened and this other thing happened, blah, 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 blah. And from that blah, 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 is that I get the feeling of what it is that has to be addressed that day. And from there is that this conversation evolves. And as I tell them, some of them are here, let's all participate. I'm not the knower of everything. I can like share things about my life, but I want you to share and to bring your knowledge and your experience into this. And we have a conversation that I hope we have with you, Saadi, as well. So you just interrupt me whenever you feel like it, of course. I shouldn't be giving you the permission to do that. Sorry.
You could,
But
why
but then and from that conversation and from whatever we share is that the dance that we're going to learn that day arises. So after a while, it's like, and so if this thing that we're talking about, whatever we're going through, is what is happening, what dance do you feel might be applicable to this situation?
I think that's a
And
great way to work, actually, Sylvia.
yeah,
Because
it
you're
has
using,
been,
again, you're using the dances as a practice to address, the needs that are arising in the group. I haven't been to Colombia, but I did go to Brazil 3 times, and everything you said about the difference, it seems to be true to me. And yes, it's very true. I discovered enormous cultural differences. If I can rewind a bit, and just again pick up on the history part, Tasneem and I, and then later Kame Miller came in, and she was leading the walks with us. So we had the 3 of us working together. For about 10 years, we were leading, sort of doing all the training. And then, the dance network was taking responsibility for the training and the certification. And we decided, no, this isn't working, because it's all dependent on the 3 of us. And we can't be everywhere, and we can't be everything to everybody. So this is when we set up actually the mentoring system in 1992, and the Mentor Teachers Guild and all of that, so that the mentoring then happens person to person, one to one. Whether you have a training or not doesn't matter. You can be with a person who knows what they're doing as an apprentice, let's say, in any particular field, and pick up the rhythm, the vibe, and the technique from them of what they're doing. You can become, an artisan or whatever. And so we based it on that sort of that old model, and that also decentralized things. That was the idea anyway. I mean, our early training, the way we trained all of the original leaders, including a number of people here, Tasneem and I and Keme, they were based on a number of, what, so to speak, elements of the dance. There was breathing practice. This was involved, again, from Samuel Lewis's papers on the breath. There was sound, mysticism of sound, which didn't mean how to make a beautiful voice. It meant to feel the voice, you could say, coming from the deepest place, coming from the absolutely deepest place. And this is again from one of Samuel Lewis's papers on spiritual music. He says, spiritual training in music is not to give one a great voice, not to make one an artist or a singer or a musician. Although it may do any or all of these things, the real purpose is so that reality expresses itself fully through the human body. He uses here Allah, but I substituted reality for Allah. So wherever you take up singing or play an instrument or dancing, the first step is to feel, you could say, that around you, within you, rather than that you're making a sound or you're doing a dance. This was Samuel Lewis's standard. So we had breathing, mysticism of sound. I added in this thing of body awareness because I found that many people, at least in the 70s and early 80s, they were sort of totally unconscious in their bodies. It wasn't like South Americans. I mean, Americans, you know, still most of them are head-centered rather than body-centered. So meditation was very important, and the walks were key. We considered the walks as key to learning the dances. Why? Because then you could learn to embody different states, move in and out of your own persona in your everyday life. So it's not just about getting together with a big group and feeling great. It's about bringing these things into everyday life. Of course, we did teach some history. I don't know how, sometimes people overemphasize this, but we were just trying to give sort of the transmission. What did we get from Sam? What did we get from Anaya Khan? We unearthed and rediscovered Ruth St. Denis, which Kame put together a book about. What did Samuel Lewis get from Ruth St. Denis? Well, how to channel dances. And I found that everything Ruth St. Denis was saying and Sam was saying, that was true to my experience, even though I hadn't read any of this stuff beforehand. And then the final piece of this was, and I know this is problematic for some folks, we were doing like a whole sort of training module on the original dances of Samuel Lewis, which people consider to be sort of out of date, or it's like, what are these about? There's hardly any melody and there's almost no mantra and there's no interest. But these are like, this is like a vocabulary of energy that Sam brings. There's the 20 key dances. And I wrote commentaries on all these that you can find also on the dance website. This shows you how you can learn how to work with energy and catch Samuel Lewis's vibe better through these dances than through anything else. Better than putting his picture on your altar or putting Ruth's picture on, or Anaya Khan. You know, feel Sam, you know, within you. This is the transmissional bit, not just honoring them and saying, oh, Sam, you're so great. Sam wanted us to be great. You know, just like Jesus did. He didn't want us to be sitting there with him on our altar all this time. I mean, really. So these were the basic elements. And this is where the mentoring was decentralized. And yes, there were things that worked and things that didn't work. I don't know if we want to break at this point, Munira, but I'll come back with what I felt.
No, I would like to carry on, and because I was going to ask that question of both of you, you know, with the what didn't work, and you've had lots of years to reflect back, and
yes,
and you know, what have you learned that carries you forward and might help some others not have to repeat some of the same things that may have happened from limited sight or experience? We're all wondering.
Let me say this, because I do have a lot of reflections on this when you asked me to do this session, Munira. And I've talked with Tasneem about this. I'm hoping she's going to be on one of these later, and she can put in her 5P or whatever. I think the elements that we brought were right. Emphasizing the dances as a spiritual practice were right. We underestimated, and I'll speak for myself, I underestimated the extent to which any practice, any transmission tends to move towards the superficial as its lifespan goes on. I don't care what it is. And so we have a transmission through a mystic or a shaman or a prophet, whatever you want, a prophetess, whatever you want to call it. And then someone comes and organizes it, and they try to make it into a bureaucracy where people are going to join this, and we're going to train you all the same way. And, you know, and then there'll be a new hierarchy and all these things. And this is almost inevitable. And then at the same time, the spiritual practice becomes more superficial. It's less about connecting to reality, and it's more about gathering a big group, let's say. And I warned about this more than 20 years ago, when people said they wanted to make the mission of the Dance Network to have the dances happen everywhere. And I said, why do we want the dances to happen everywhere? Let's have them happen in the deepest way possible, wherever they are happening, rather than just spread, spread, spread. So I would say one of the mistakes I made, maybe I could speak for Tasneem, I don't know. We did make things a lot easier for people. We show them how, okay, if you want to lead a dance and you've never done this, tell people the words, sing the melody, show them the movements, do all that in 5 minutes or less, so that they've got it all within their short-term memory, and then begin to show, get them into it quickly. 1, 2, 3. And, you know, people, they wonder where that came from us. You know, no one was doing this before, because they didn't need to with Sam's dances. There were only 20 or 30 dances when I came around. Now there are hundreds. You know, I've got 100 Aramaic dances, but I mean, you know, and some of the phrases are very long. So you have to develop different ways of leading these things. More traditions, native traditions are represented. Other parts of the body are involved, as in some of the native Middle Eastern dances that came through. So in some ways we overspread because they were being over-restricted. And now I think a balance point has to come. And the point number 2 is that I think we didn't do well. We tried to, but we didn't try hard enough. Again, speaking for myself, we wrote ethical guidelines, which were guidelines. They were affirmations. They're written in the form of affirmations, but we did not emphasize them enough. We did not emphasize them in the training enough, I would say. The extent to which, and I'll read you something from the original founding statement of the MTG, and I think this is important.
And what is MTG, for those that may not know?
This is the Mentor Teachers Guild, and this was written in 1992, so more than 30 years ago. Ultimate responsibility for the dances and their continuance lies with human beings. The dances are a gift for our remembrance of cosmic unity and diversity, and the preciousness of all life. Should an organizational apparatus fail or need to be traded in for a new vehicle, the dances will continue through the dedication of individuals who step forward and say, I can, and who remain companions to each other on the way. Toward this vision, we acknowledge that organizations lend themselves to the type of dysfunctional behavior many of us experienced in our families. We may vow to stay clear with each other, recognizing the veils that lead us to project our own ungrown-up expectations and judgments onto each other. And we may vow to step forward joyfully, gratefully, and without expectation that any organization will feed, support, or empower us. And this was right along the lines of what Sam wrote about, Murshid Sam wrote. It's all about one-to-one. It's not about the organization. The one-to-one keeps things alive. Don't expect anyone to be your support, actually. I didn't, Tasneem didn't. And I would say we didn't emphasize this enough. We didn't emphasize the extent to which when you have very high ideals and you're falling short of those ideals organizationally, the organization tends to fill in with dysfunctional behavior. And you wrote a book about this, Munira, or helped write a book about this that you didn't get credit for, called The Addictive Organization. More than when I first met you, that was one of the first things that we had a rapport about, because yeah, that's what's happening. You know, this was more than 20 years ago, because you can see the trends for this. It's almost inevitable. It's no one's fault. It's almost inevitable. But we didn't warn people enough that this was a potential. That when you get this sort of self-aggrandizing ego Then you've got teachers traveling around and manipulating people to set up workshops for them, or creating special titles for themselves, or this or that or the other thing, all sorts of things. It's normal, it's natural. So one has to be aware of it and sort of guard against it.
But you know, Saadi, the group itself also, the groups in general, I would say, tend to realize this. So, you know, the groups too realize when you as a teacher, or I could say I as a teacher, am projecting or whatever, and they like choose who they want to work with, and who they find that has a profound attunement to whatever dance you're doing, and they resonate with that. No?
I agree
So,
perfectly. And I find that people now coming to the work, whether it's the Aramaic or the dances, they're much more mature than we were in the 70s. They have been, as you saying, through various spiritual searches, they come much more mature, much more ready to go for the real stuff, go for the reality
and
than
much more
we were.
demanding, no?
Sure.
Because the young people that are coming really demand coherence.
Absolutely. I mean, Sam says in the film Sunseed, and this is a throwaway line Murshid Sam has, he says, the old want power, the young want freedom.
Huh.
And it's still true today. And some people, you know, some old people stay young and some young people get old very quickly. So, you know, whereas the real power, the real freedom is found, I won't say it's found within, it's found from the unity of the within and the without in something bigger, the reality or the mystery or whatever you want to call it. It's not found in any outer acclamation or support or building up of self-esteem or things like that. So, yeah, you know, I agree. I thank God and Goddess that there is more maturity coming now to the spiritual paths. I find that everywhere, actually, beyond the
Yes,
dances too.
there is definitely, and whereas I consider that I was one of these young people that whatever they said, do this, I would want to do the other thing because that's the way I was. I can now I can see that working with young people, which we do a lot here in this in Atlantida, a lot of young people come, and we get different different groups, different people, different backgrounds from many different places, and well, as in all the groups, it's a matter of that there are many different people with a lot of different expectations, we could say, from what they wish to acquire from a dance training, and as a mentor and whatever, it's you can read people, let's say it in a way.
Yeah.
You can read the people and what they're there for, and guide them. No, many people fall in love with the dances and they immediately want to lead and whatever, and you can kind of like tell, okay, this person is really wanting to do deep work with themselves and go deeply into themselves and whatever, and that is fantastic. Whereas this other person just wants to, well, not just, but they mainly want to give workshops and make a living off the dances, which they can't, you know, nobody can, and and then and you can tell that. So that is where this personal thing comes in. Like for me, if we're talking about something that is really important, and I work it in a very conscious way with the students, is the part of the attunement. When you're doing the attunement of the dance, what is it that you're doing? Why are you leading that dance? What does it communicate to you? More than the technical part, which is important, but you know, it's like if
Yeah.
you have the master
Yeah.
of the instrument but no heart,
Yeah.
well,
It's
it
not
just
there.
sounds good, but
No.
there's nothing there.
So I want to interject here in a moderator kind of role to say we're flowing into what is the third part. This has been more of an organic conversation, and already we're raising some of the issues that we said would come in this part, which has to do with what do you see as the future, where are we going, what are some issues about cultural appropriation. It's already been arising here, and we're already talking about it. I'm inviting everyone in the group here. This is the time, if you have any questions you would like to put into the part 4, this is the time to ask those questions via the chat. So please, if you have questions for either one or both of our guest presenters here, please take this opportunity as we talk now about that issue. One of the questions that arose for me, for you, in this topic has to do with where have you seen people, or where have you experienced within yourself an impetus that has arisen, that's expressed itself, that you've said, ah, there it is. There it is. It's happening through this person, or through me. I mean, obviously, Aramaic was one of those impetus that just arose and was another expression. Where have you seen that arising? But also, you know, where do you have concerns about what's arising? And where do we, particularly those in North America, have to be aware and concerned about what's happening in the global expansion of the dances, with what's the cultural appropriation, cultural sensitivity issues?
Yeah.
So
We
please,
used, we,
whoever
we used to
wishes
call
speak.
this we used to call this cultural strip mining before the term cultural appropriation, and it was always an issue, particularly with the native traditions. So it was very, very difficult in the early days because people brought various sorts of songs into the circles, wanted to make dances out of them. And so, you know, does this have a native teacher who's blessed it and given away, was one of the ways in which we looked at this. And very few of these dances did. And particularly when I started teaching in Europe, which is a whole other thing, because all of the early leaders in Europe were trained using this model that I mentioned. They were even further afield from, you could say, the Native American tradition. And so whenever anybody said was Native American, that was the new craze, whether it was anything close to authentic or not. You know, a number of us felt very, very uncomfortable about this and addressed it. So it was very, very few teachers who were willing to spend time apprenticing with native elders, either in Australia, which is another place where we taught, or New Zealand. There were some who apprenticed with Maori elders. There were some that apprenticed with Aboriginal elders. There were, that's a long apprenticeship generally, and then to bring that into the dances is yet another thing in an authentic way. So this is a big issue. The other sort of reverse issue is because people did have this tendency that Sylvia mentioned, not everybody, but we noted there was a tendency just to want to gather people, you know, to become the big workshop leader, this and that. So there's an emphasis on always the new. We need a new dance, new dance, new dance, new dance. And so people were taking melodies from, say, Scottish folk melodies and putting some mantra to it. You know, they're basically copying melodies from another tradition, or from a 70s rock song and putting a mantra to it. And you're building a mantric practice on top of something that was intended for something else. Say music. Music is its own mantra. Music is its own spiritual path. So if you put a Hindu mantra on top of a Scottish melody or something, you know, what are we communicating here energetically? It's not clear. You know, it's not a clear, how do we say, honest thing. And same thing, yeah, you can copy melodies from here and there and make it popular for a season, just like pop music is, but it doesn't mean it's going to be of enduring value to anyone. It's just another craze. So
Like here, Saadi, with that, here in Colombia, we still have some indigenous groups that have been remained after the conquest, and they were not wiped out totally. And but you know, of course, there isn't a lot of trust from their part with regards to whatever us that we are all what we call mestizos, because we are all a mixture of Spanish with Indian, with everything, with black, whatever. You know, we're not pure anything, and of course there is a lack of trust, uh, and they're not very willing to share their things because first they don't know where we're coming from and in what context we're going to share it. And of course, there are some of these people that are very happy to share the dances because they like the attention or whatever. But we've had instances where where this indigenous man was teaching us some dances, and suddenly his wife stood up and scolded him. You're not doing that the way it should be done. So do it how it should be done. And that was very interesting because as you can see, the way like in a way like the women, though they don't participate outwardly, they are still like the ones that take care of keeping the things the way they should be done. For example, you can read that of the culture. But for us, or for some of us, or for many of us, and for many of the youngsters too, there is this thing that has to do with well, as you all know, this thing of the imperialism and the coming of here we have something that we call the complex of Bochica. And that complex has to do with it. Everything that comes from outside is better than anything that has arisen here. So anyone comes that is called and everybody says, oh yes, fantastic, you know, let's go to that workshop. And you know, well, nothing special. So so it's very interesting because it has a lot to do with uh, now here finding our identity. And there are a lot of young people that are wanting to return like to, well, the Pachamama. All of you, of course, have heard about the Pachamama and things that have to do with the land. But we don't speak the language of the indigenous people. We don't do it. But there is still a very profound feeling that they want to return to the ways of the land and contact with the earth and the elements and whatever. And so how can you say that this in a vernacular language is not meaningful? It is, because for them is what
sure.
is meaningful for them right now, no?
Yeah.
And as for many of us at some point, or not everybody, of course, but when we could sing dances that had been translated from English to Spanish, um, they were meaningful. They were very meaningful because we could understand in our minds maybe what was going on. And eventually we would evolve into the mantra part. But first we had to overcome this thing that religion, and just know that it had more to do with spirituality, and that it was a language of the heart. And that is where I feel that we are now. So, of course, there are many dances that are new creations, but they resonate very much with us because we are trying to build our new language with this reconciling with our indigenous roots. And though some of their dances have been shared, well, here we have had to build something new but meaningful for the population that is circulating. And these youngsters, these young people are really committed to all of this work and working with themselves and working with the land and healing a lot of things. And how can you say that if we sing in Spanish, they're not doing it with their heart? Well, they are.
No, I mean, absolutely. I mean, Sam says, you know, the forms may change. He says this over and over again. The devotion is actually the fuel of whatever it's supposed to be. What constitutes a sacred phrase, that can change from culture to culture. Absolutely. I mean, we began thinking, well, you know, if you can get all the religions that are based in the universal worship, you're doing pretty well. You know, that was in the 70s. We didn't even have dances to represent all these 6 or 8 religions, the so-called great religions. And there were no native traditions in those days. Moinudin added native traditions to his form of this ritual. But then, you know, you have to break out of these forms, basically. This was a very Europeanized form. And I think one of the dangers of this, it's a reverse cultural appropriation, is that sometimes I feel, you know, we try to export sort of an ideology with the dances, which is that, you know, you're all supposed to be universalist, you know, liberal white Americans, basically. Whereas some people are totally universal mystics and they're fully just steeped in one tradition. I know many. I've met many around the world. I've had the grace of meeting many. It doesn't mean they're going to go sing and dance in all the different traditions, but they are as deep as anything. So they're really, as you say, Sylvia, the question is, what are we doing and for whom? And what is it? For me, the thing that translates is devotion and some touching base with reality or the great mystery. End of story.
And
You
that
know,
there
if
are
it's not
so
there, then it's just some outer performance or some outer show.
there are so many ways, as one of these Sufis said. I'm sorry, I'm so bad with names, but I think it was a Sufi. I don't know if it was Rumi or who it was that said that there are so many ways to kneel and kiss the ground. Who said that, Saadi?
Rumi.
Do you?
Yeah,
Rumi, okay.
Mevlana Rumi. Yeah.
Sorry, I'm really lousy with names. But and that's
Yes.
it.
Yes.
And
Yes.
and the emphasis is on if you're really doing it from the depths of your heart, and if that is there, you can do almost anything.
Yeah, then you can go out in public like we did, you know, in Russia or in the Middle East in that time. And you can do dances in public and have it be an actual demonstration of deep peace, but only if everybody is fully attuned to that. You know, then you've got the dances, you know, not as just a political action statement, but actually you are there in the vibe, in the atmosphere of what Sam calls universal peace, which is not the outer, it's the inner and the outer together. He makes this quite clear. It's not just peace between nations. Nations can go. Nations may be going as a human innovation. They're relatively recent. We lived without them for tens of thousands of years. Tribes are going in some cases. Where are we going next? That's the question. That's one of the many questions. Anyway, Munira, back to you.
Yes, I'm trying, and it's time to interject and make a shift. And we've had a lot of words, but this has been very deep and very profound, bringing us back to essence. What is essence of who we are and where we are? And that also includes making connection to source through practice. And Sylvia, will you guide us And thank you for the questions that are starting to pour in, and then we'll devote ourselves to a time of questions after this practice.
So as I was saying, there are new creations. We have a brother from Peru, and his name is Alonso del Rio. And Alonso del Rio is a medicine man in Peru, very beautiful. And he has created a very beautiful medicine music for the ceremonies of ayahuasca and whatever other medicine he shares, I don't know. And Grace Marie, who has together with Darbesha, I should say, have been instrumental in the spread of the dances in South America. They came so much and were willing to come when nobody else really was. And so Grace has worked a lot with Alonso, and Alonso created this song, which I think you know. Mono, ya que estás ahí, escribes por favor en el chat las palabras de Madre Tierra, Madre Vida, ¿me haces el favor? Sorry, this is a short Spanish thing between Spanish speakers. So Mono, Arjun, Jorge Calero, is going to write the words of the dance that I'm going to do. And Grace did a beautiful dance to accompany these words. And it's talking about the Mother Earth and Mother Life, and to place me in her heart. Llévame en tu corazón, the medicine of your love, la medicina de tu amor. Madre Tierra, Madre Vida, llévame en tu corazón, la medicina de tu amor. That is how you pronounce it. And so, what can I say? Just connect your heart with what for you is the Mother Earth. And even if you can't sing the words or don't pronounce them well, she is there listening to your heart. Oh, I'm going to turn this on. Oh, I remembered Saadi, you see, after all. And okay. And just go attuning yourself with what this beautiful Mother Earth is for you, and feeling her heartbeat. And feeling your heartbeat resonating with hers. Feeling her unconditional love. And this nourishment, this life. Madre Tierra, Madre Vida. Madre Tierra, Madre Vida. Llévame en tu corazón la medicina llévame en tu corazón, llévame en tu corazón. La medicina de tu amor, la medicina de tu amor. Madre tierra, madre vida, madre tierra, madre vida, llévame en tu corazón la medicina de tu amor. On your breath, madre tierra, madre vida, madre tierra, madre vida, llévame en tu corazón la medicina de tu amor. Llévame, llévame en tu corazón la medicina de tu amor. Llévame en tu corazón la medicina de tu amor. Gracias, mamita, gracias, mamita. Gracias, madrecita tierra, gracias. Mm.
Gracias a ti, Eva, for that practice. The practices remind us of essence that what these two have been calling us to in this conversation. We only have less than 10 minutes really, so there'll be a couple of questions, and sorry to say you'll have to answer them, you know, on the surface and invite us into a deeper exploration. There's two that are related, so I'm going to just read those and then ask you to respond with what is arising within you in response to them. Dances keep expanding, and now there are ones that don't contain a spiritual phrase. How do you define the dances now that there are beautiful ones that are deep without the phrase? And this relates, or is the same question. Dances keep expanding without a spiritual. What what are the perimeters or parameters of being called a dance of universal peace? Any response?
Well, the question of what a sacred phrase is has always been open. It's been something that's talked about from the very beginning. One of the ways I like to look at it is that some dances are like, how would we say, they're like wildflowers. They bloom for a season and then they're gone. And others keep sort of going on and on and on. And only time can tell. Some dances that we thought were absolutely foundational and that Radha Teresa Bucco put in her foundation manual, now we look back at it, we think, you know. And so it's very difficult to tell over a long period of time. But from the point of view, my current point of view is that greater diversity ensures longer longevity. Whereas if you try to limit things too much, it's like trying to limit an ecosystem or make it all into, you know, a beautiful English garden. You know, you're actually not helping anyone. So let the seeds go where they may. And then we have to trust that whatever, Allah, the great mystery, you know, the goddess is going to preserve the dances if they want to be preserved. Again, in many ways, the walks are much more portable. They're much more transportable. And the walks, actually, there are a number of new walking meditations also, in that they're not so culturally limited. They're somewhat, but not so much. So I think we have to say, as Jesus says, by their fruits you will know them. By Yeshua says, you know, you'll find, you know, who is bearing actual fruit and who's just repeating the past. You know, you can feel it, you can tell it.
Yes. Munira, we can't hear you.
Unmute.
Thank you. Thank you. The question with new dance leaders, should there be guidelines for simple dances? In our group with the mentees, we've suggested they select a dance that they feel a heart calling to lead. But then if they pick some more complicated dance, it's too challenging. So are there guidelines that you offer as a mentor?
Again, as Sylvia was saying, and I'll pass it to Sari, you know, I think it's up to the individual person and the mentor relationship. I chose for my very first dance to lead an incredibly complicated dance with 3-part harmony and God knows what that was written by Alaudine Matthew. And, you know, and I totally fell on my face with the thing. And that was the best thing that could have happened to me. So I learned from that. No one had to tell me, choose something a bit simpler. But it depends. Some people can't, you know, they're not, you know,
I'm glad you thought you were a nobody, Saadi, because
I was a nobody.
Imagine if you would have thought you were a somebody, what you would have chosen.
Yeah, exactly. I was totally out of my body. But, you know, anyway, you know, it's better to think you're a nobody. I also find it was much easier to train a shy person, probably because I was a shy person, if you can believe it, rather than to train a person who thinks they all have it together and, you know, they can perform, you know, at the drop of a hat.
Yes, that I agree so much with that, that it's so personal. Some of them just have to go through the experience of falling on your face. Is it what you called? I don't have those expressions in English. And some of them are actually willing to be guided and that you can make suggestions to them and they're willing to listen, but some of them aren't. So,
Yeah.
you know, some of us learn the hard ways and some of us learn in other ways.
Yeah. I mean, you can't dictate a good relationship, good mentoring relationship. You know, you can cultivate it, but, you know, it's not about signing someone up to something. There has to be that rapport person to person, which is what I was writing about and what I read you before. If that rapport is not there, the transmission isn't there. And then it's just performing. You know, it's what Ruth St. Denis calls meaningless dexterities of the body. Anyway.
Okay. Tasneem has written a comment, is the dance leader personally developed in their own individual practice to be able to recognize the state that a dance may leave the group with, and almost more importantly, how to follow the spirit of guidance to what seems to want to manifest. And I will just simply add in here that Tasneem is on the docket for January. You've got to wait all the way
January.
to January of 2024, but we'll be having a chance to interact,
Alhamdulillah.
hear her wisdom shared.
Tasneem was in South America also many, many times. In the same time I was going to Europe and Australia, New Zealand, and Russia and those places in Eastern Europe. She was going to, you know, a lot of countries in South America in the 90s and even before. So, yeah, I agree. I mean, it depends. You have to deepen in some practice. This is what we wrote into the original guidelines. Deepen, stand where you are and deepen in that. So that then when you walk into a circle, you're already bringing the atmosphere of that. I mean, I don't find any.
But also, Saadi,
yeah,
the dances can be your practice.
they can be your practice if you really take it as a practice, Sylvia. If when you're out for a walk, you're walking the mantra, you're breathing the mantra, you're feeling the mantra. And we used to recommend this to people. So, I mean, personally, I'm less universal than I used to. I mean, I'm not that, personally, I am universal, but I don't see any point in leading a fake Native American dance now, or something from, you know, I'll lead. Obviously, a lot of people want me to lead Aramaic, because there's, you know, hundreds of these now, but, and something Sufi, but I mean, I have to deepen where I am. And that's just a process of maturity, I think.
It is.
And people come into things in different stages, and they come in where they come in.
And different things resonate in different times.
Absolutely.
And you're ready for different things in different moments. And
yeah.
and the thing that I find that is really important is that you really have to listen to yourself and follow like that intuition and whatever it is, the calling of your heart, and that is where you have to go.
Absolutely.
There's one question that arose, and if you have a 30-second elevator talk about this one, I would love to hear it. I've worked on my own over the years. And actually, it's Aziz asked this question, which has to do with language. And I'm trying to find it right now, but basically the question has to do with the use of the word master. And is there any kind of policy, or is there anything on that that we follow?
As you could guess, there's no policy. It's received in different countries, different ways. It's
and
not
in the language alone, as you well know, of course, Adi, in Spanish, in English, the word master has no gender, whereas in Spanish it does. So
yeah,
it can become very complicated.
very complicated. And we discovered this when we were trying to translate the Inayat Khan invocation, the Toward the One, into different languages. So, you know, for the value of the connection, it's helpful to use the original words of Inayat Khan, Hazrat Inayat Khan. On the other hand, he did several drafts of this invocation if we look at his original writings. So we have to understand what it is that we're talking about. And so like when I hear the Lord's Prayer said in some church service, like I did in the King's coronation last week, you know, I'm hearing the Aramaic prayer. I'm not hearing the English words. So at the same time, when I'm feeling the invocation of Inayat Khan, I'm feeling the Arabic that he was translating from, which is, the word is very different from master.
And because well, as all these masters that have passed through the history of the world, the ones that we know of, that we don't know all of them, but they each speak to their population and in the language and in the images that the people of that time also understand. So
Yep.
no, you say the invocation as it is, but there is also the opportunity to open it, to feel it, and how you would say it in your own words, and
Yeah.
that's how it becomes really significant, and not a bunch of words that you just memorized and repeated because that's the way it was said, but that
Well, I
have
think
no
the main
meaning.
thing to remember, and that I tell people that they don't believe, is that Anaya Khan didn't do this so that people would say it after him. He did it as an attunement for himself before he would begin to give a lecture.
Imagine.
Yeah. So he's saying toward the, this is his intention setting. And he's thinking in Urdu and probably with Arabic behind it. His intention is toward the one, the perfection of love, harmony, and beauty, the only being. He's in process of connecting and then feeling the audience, feeling everything around him, united with all the illuminated souls. As Shamsur Biors told me once, one of Inaya Khan's murids, original murids, he said, who are all these illuminated souls? He says, well, every being is an illuminated soul. The plants, the trees, the animals, so it depends on how you're regarding it, and it's all the embodiment of a spirit of guidance that is happening now, not some other time, not back somewhere. And it's not a statement of belief, it's an attunement. It's not a
Mm,
creed.
mm,
It was never intended to be a creed.
mm.
Exactly. It's all about how we deal with forms and our own individual relationship to forms. And we each have a different relationship to the forms that are meaningful that we use.
Mhm.
Nice 30 seconds, Munira.
Yes. Thank you, Saadi. Which is a great segue into our conclusion here of this incredible time together. Thank you to Sylvia, Fiba, and thank you to Saadi. This has accomplished what we hoped it would accomplish. It stimulated discussion. Hopefully it raises as many or more questions as are brought into it. Hopefully people have context for the dances and are inspired to look and explore other resources. And hopefully there's been a time of feeling connected to essence, to source. Ultimately, that's where we're headed. That's where we want to be. That's where we want to go.